Good morning.
It is such an honor and a blessing for me and my family to be able to be here today to worship together with you and your families. Once again, I'd like to thank Reverend Dr. David for his guidance and his nurture. Also to Debbie and Robert for, as a student, as a servant of God, I can't ask for better teachers in this journey. Today is Christ the King Sunday, which some may refer to as the last Sunday after Pentecost, or the last Sunday of the Christian liturgical year. Today is also the last worship Sunday as we approach the waiting and watching season of Advent. Just for some of those that aren't aware, but Christ the King Sunday is the newest day in the liturgical year across the Western Church. It was first added in 1925 by the Roman Catholic Church in response to increasing secularization movements worldwide. Pope Pius XI made that declaration the basis of a holy day to be observed throughout the entire Roman Catholic Church. Christ, the King of the universe, after the Second Vatican, which Rome moved in observance of this day from October to the final Sunday of the Christian year. And many Protestants, including the United Methodist Church, who adopted the revised Common Lectionary and its calendar, have followed suit. As we are reminded of what today is, this chapter of our gospel text for today focuses on the betrayal and the arrest of Jesus. The gospel reading that we heard Cynthia read speaks of a conversation between Pilate, a governor from the Roman Empire, and Jesus. Already the people are so quick to hand over Jesus because they do not believe in him. They do not seek him. They do not follow him, yet they are threatened by him. Although Jesus was finally condemned to death and executed by Romans, in John's gospel, the accusers are always called the Jews, who are mortal enemies. But with careful reading, the gospel reveals that the Jews are not of the religious or ethnic grouping, but that referring to those who were in the temple religious authorities. If we back up a couple verses before our readings for today, in John 18, verses 31, Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." The Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." The intention to have Jesus killed was that the Jews wanted Pilate to pass the death sentence on Jesus because they have already found him guilty. John does not describe all the details of the trial, but a charge has been brought up against Jesus. Pilate now questions Jesus about the accusation, whether he poses a threat to Rome or not. "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus wanted to know whether Pilate was asking this question for the Jews or for himself. The Jews were looking for a political king, and Jesus was not at that moment their king. In fact, the Jews were complaining that Jesus was a criminal. Pilate dismissed any prior conversations with the Jews. He simply wanted to know, "What have you done?" Then Jesus explains the nature of his kingdom. He has no political motives. His kingdom is of a spiritual one, which is not expanded or defended by military force. We talk so much about status with titles and names, many things with titles such as kings and leaders, with expectations. Yet Jesus argues that his kingdom is founded on truth. This is indifference to earthly kingdoms which are founded on power. Aspects of earthly kings come with power, wealth, and force. In this past week, reading this text, it took me back to a certain time in my childhood when I used to hear my great uncles and great aunts and grandma talk about how the first king of our country island of Tonga became royalty. Tawha'ahau, King George I, was Tonga's first king. Tonga is the only remaining Polynesian kingdom, a constitutional monarchy. Recently, Tonga went through a democratic reform. The king gave up certain powers to the people, and the prime minister, leader of the government, is now elected by the people through the parliament and not appointed by the king. But it wasn't always like this. It is said that there is no other ruler in the Pacific that has done more for his people and his country than Tawha'ahau, King George II. Historians call him maker of the modern Tonga. Tongans were ruled by 3 different dynasties. Each dynasty had its own chiefs, and each chief was the head of the socio-political unit. Tawha'ahau, King George, changed his traditional socio-political systems by uniting Tonga into one kingdom under the rule of a constitution. He kept Tonga unique in its position and as the only island country in the Pacific that has never been colonized. He was also responsible for the successful transition of Tonga society being uncivilized to a modern one through adopting Western ideas and accepting Christianity. Some of the chiefs and the dynasties of the other families were not pleased with this change that they saw in Tawha'ahau, King George, for they saw it as a threat. Before Christianity arrived in Tonga in 1822 by British missionaries, acceptance of Christ got you killed, hung, shamed on your family, and even brought war. The traditional religion was bound up with the politics of Tonga and occupied a central place in the Tongan worldview. Tawha'ahau, King George I, was still a heathen in this time, and so were his people. Each chief and his people had their own gods, and the chief was believed to have mana, or a supernatural power given by the gods according to their own goodwill. Failure to perform these religious duties and to honor the gods would cause war, famines, epidemics, diseases, and death. Offerings were made on important occasions, and the gods were consulted, particularly in the case of war, or before going on a long voyage. Tawha'ahau had 2 gods who lived in the sea. But throughout his reign in Tonga, he fought and went to war with the other dynasty rulers. There were plans to have him persecuted, which failed. It was a very dark time in the island country of Tonga. His intent was to bring all 3 major islands, Tonga Tapu, Ha'apai, and Vava'u, under one system and to convert them into Christians. Through the influence and with the help of the missionaries, along with this newfound faith, King George was determined and succeeded. He successfully united the 3 main islands under one system in 1845 and converted many people into the Christian faith. It was in 1839 that the King of Tonga, George I, declared, quote, "It is of the Lord of the heaven and the earth that I have been appointed to speak to you. He is King of kings, and he is the Lord of lords. He is righteous in all his works. We are all the works of his hands. and the sheep of his pasture. And his will towards us is that we shall live in peace and love. Therefore it is that I make known to you all, to all the chiefs, and to all the governors, and to all the people, as well as different strangers and foreigners that live with me. King George then dedicated the kingdom of Doma, the people, the land, the plants, and the animals to God by lifting a handful of soil to the skies and praying to God. Since then, Doma has been a place where its people seek to be dedicated to God. In fact, the national motto is translated as God and Doma are my inheritance. Indeed, Jesus is a king with divine authority. The gospel story of Jesus Christ is not the making of a king. Jesus did not come into the world to be a king, but rather to bring in God's kingdom. Jesus is very attentive in his ministry to express that God's kingdom is being brought in. Jesus Christ is the foundation upon which everything rests. Jesus came to restore us to God, to undo the sin that Adam and Eve brought into the world and in which we have inherited. Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, hung on a cross, died in our place, rose from the dead, and is coming again to restore us, body and soul, to God. That is the truth. You can't test it and you can't measure it, but you are baptized into it. Isn't it amazing how Jesus says in verse 37, what Cynthia read earlier in our scriptures? Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice. The word belongs stands apart from saying everyone who believes. In other words, Pilate did not belong to the truth, so he could not see Jesus as the Son of God. It is also the truth that because of Jesus Christ, you and I are forgiven. Truth is that because of the work of the Son of God, you are righteous in God's sight. You are perfect in his eyes, and you are his dearly loved child. Christ the King Sunday is about much more than literal kings. It's about who or what ultimately rules over our lives. So I ask you to take a moment and think about, what does it mean to think of Jesus Christ as King? Do you think of glamour and fame? Do you think of endless lavishing meals? Or do you think of power? Jesus Christ in our gospel reading stands before you, about to be crucified for you, because he is the way and the truth and the life. Do you want one last look at King Jesus? Well, look up, not to the ceiling, but at the cross. Hear him, seek him, follow him, believe him, and trust in him. If the king is dead, what point is there in wishing him long life? But the point is that the kingdom will endure. Finally, when he is buried, his body is encased, and on the third day when he comes out, all creation and we with it cries, long live the king.